So, in this final episode, we ask ourselves what is wrong with the story of Abraham's elephant going to Mecca. We're going to see that there's a lot wrong with the story. Some of the big ones is the fact that the story of the expedition to the Hijaz was never done by Abraham himself. He sent a general. There's no proof that it ever reached Mecca. And most importantly, the year that this expedition occurred was 553 AD and not 570 AD, which throws a massive spanner in the overall story. Another big issue is the fact that there is no mention in either inscriptions or in the history written by Procopius of any elephants involved in this expedition. And finally, there's also the problem that elephants can't survive in a desert without sweatlands because there's no water for elephants to cool themselves down. So the idea that elephants could have traveled along the deserts of the Hijaz is just silly. But there's a lot more that we're going to cover. So strap in, as we say, and we're going to get stuck in. So here's the typical image of the story of Surah 105 as imagined by Muslims, with birds flying above, dropping stones down on the enemies of Islam. Now, a rock inscription proves Abraha's expedition was in 553 AD, not 570, and there is no mention of any elephants used in this event in either the inscription or Procopius' history. In fact, Procopius doesn't mention any elephants. Daniel Beck says that contemporary non-Arabic sources do not support the traditional Islamic history. Procopius describes Byzantine maritime assistance for the Ethiopian expedition against Du Nuaz, the Jewish Himyarite ruler of Yemen. He further describes the Ethiopian-Byzantine victory and Abraha's subsequent rise to power. If war elephants were used in those events, they likely would have excited the Byzantine historian, but they are absent from his narrative. He also notices that this expedition was headed by Abba Gabar, not Abraha. Abraha plainly directed at least one military expedition into the Hijaz. The Muraygan inscription in South Arabia, written in Sabaean, records the victory of Abraha's forces at an oasis called Taraban, which is located 100 kilometers east of Taif, itself located directly about 100 kilometers to the southeast of Mecca. That's a fair old distance from Mecca. The inscription describes Abraha's forces as a sort of confederation of Kenda and other Bedouin allies, headed by Abba Gabar, rather than being Ethiopian troops led by Abraha himself. Scholars have pictured an assault on Mecca by the Ethiopians and their war elephants as an adjunct to the campaign described in this inscription, but there's a problem. But the Muraygan inscription describes a Hijazi conflict between Bedouin tribes without directly involving Ethiopian troops. There is no contemporary historical record of any attack on Mecca with or without elephants, or any antagonism between the Christian ruler Abraha and a polytheistic pilgrimage to the Kaaba in Mecca, nor is there any contemporary record of how Abraha himself died. The Muraygan inscription is dated to 553 AD, and it is assumed that Abraha must have died shortly thereafter as he drops out of history. It is extremely unlikely that the Muraygan victory inscription would have been made had Abraha himself been killed by avian-delivered clay balls or otherwise, or his army annihilated during the same Hijazi expedition. The other problem is that the assault on Taraban took place in 553 AD, long before the 570 AD date that Islamic tradition assigns to Abraha's expedition and Muhammad's birth. Surah 105 has remarkable parallels to books 2 and 3 of Maccabees. The parallels between 2 and 3 Maccabees and Surah 105 are plain. All three texts involve an evil plan devised by polytheistic royal antagonists to use war elephants to destroy a pious community of monotheistic believers. In all three texts, the polytheist's evil plan is thrown into disarray and failure when, responding to the believers' unyielding devotion, the true God turns against their pagan tormentors and dramatically intervenes to save his chosen people. In all three instances, the polytheistic troops who accompany the elephants are left in ruins by God's astonishing intervention. The Quran gives a nod to its audience's awareness of the biblical stories alluded to. The Quranic account begins by noting that its audience already knows the underlying story. Surah 105 opens with the phrase, "Have you not heard? Alam Tara." Surah 105 then reminds its audience how their Lord, Rabuka, dealt with the companions of the elephant by making the companions' plan or plot, Kedahum, go astray, Tadlinlan. The Maccabean subtext explains this audience awareness. A community familiar with biblical stories would have known the stirring tales of Jews being saved from marauding pagan forces and their war elephants through their unyielding fidelity to God. Those tales would have had particular resonance for monotheists in late antiquity, where the influence of a successor pagan imperial threat, the Sasanians, which was famed for its use of intimidating Indian war elephants, extended throughout Arabic-speaking regions. A survey of some key quotes from the Maccabees. So as you can see, the first one we're looking at is Book 1 of the Maccabees, Chapter 6. The elephants were roused for battle by being given a mixture of grapes and mulberries to drink. These beasts were distributed among the phalanxes. He got in position under the elephant and stabbed it from below, slaying it. The beast fell to the ground on top of him, and he died there. Then if we look at Book 2, the Maccabees, Chapter 10, we see protective angels essentially being featured. When the fighting reached its height, there appeared to the enemy from the heavens 5 magnificent men, each astride a horse with a golden bridle, and they placed themselves in the forefront of the Jews. Surrounding Maccabeus and shielding him with their own armour, they kept him from being wounded. Meanwhile, they propelled arrows and thunderbolts at the enemy, leaving them confused and blinded so that they were thrown into complete disarray and routed. Look at 2 Maccabees 11 now. And while they were still near Jerusalem, a horseman suddenly appeared at their head, clothed in white and brandishing weapons of gold. 2 Maccabees 13 then. In the year 149, Judas and his men were informed that Antiochus Eupator was advancing on Judea with a large army, and that accompanying him was Lysias, his guardian, who was in charge of the government. Additionally, they had a Greek force consisting of 110,000 foot soldiers, 5,300 horsemen, 22 elephants, and 300 chariots armed with scythes. The difficult language of Surah 105, 3-4 should be understood as a comparatively straightforward reference to a host of biblical angels ordered in ranks who delivered divine punishment against the companions of the elephant. Again from Daniel Beck's paper, Surah 105:4 recounts the elephant companions' destruction by a rain of stones of baked clay, bi hijaratin min sijilin. Although the Mufassirun were not able to give a completely satisfactory explanation for what they recognized to be the foreign-derived word sijilin, its rough contextual meaning is readily apparent because a parallel version of the phrase is used in Surah 11:82, which recounts the destruction of Lutz, that's the biblical Lot's sinful city, by hijratin min sijilin, i.e. stones of baked clay, in the traditional understanding. And this is what is being referred to there. More likely the phrase refers to biblical brimstone and would be an Arabic allusion using an exotic word derived from Middle Persian to the Hebrew term for brimstone from Exodus 19:24, gafrit, which meant burning sulfur. Surah 11:82-83 further describes the hijaratin min sijilin as being in layers and marked from your Lord, which suggests an inscribed divine order or judgment, perhaps consistent with the Arabized foreign term sijilin, being understood as a written command from a distant imperial sovereign, imaginatively delivered by Allah's angels, as simultaneously both his written judgment and his execution. Surah 51:33 varies the formula, with the Hijratan men tenen being marked for the transgressors. But unlike Surah 11:83, the tenen of Surah 51:33 are not described as being in layers. Surah 105:4 is consistent with language of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction. Thus Surah 105:4 imagines the wicked pagan army being struck and destroyed by the equivalent of divine brimstone, consistent with the parallel language of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction in Surah 11:82 and Surah 51:33, as well as the Quran's general theme of divine punishment for scoffing oppressors. But there is one critical difference. In both Surah 11:82 and Surah 51:33, the Hijratan min Sijilin or Tenen is rained down by a host of angels. Yet in the traditional view, Surah 105 strangely identifies a flock of birds as delivering that same punishment. Why the difference between these Quranic uses of almost identical punishment language? The answer is simple. There is no difference. All three Quranic instances of this unusual punishment language should be understood the exact same way, as the divine punishment hurled down by angels against wicked unbelievers. This makes the Quranic language consistent. It also comports with the biblical subtext of Surah Al-Fil. At the crux of 3 Maccabees 6:18, God opened the heavenly gates from which two glorious angels of fearful aspect descended, visible to all but the Jews. The angels then routed the Ptolemaic army and its elephants. Surah 105:4 should be understood as referring to divine punishment similarly delivered by an angelic host, saving the believers, i.e. biblical Jews, from the companions of the elephant. So we can see here the problem with the idea of an elephant going all the way from Yemen to the Hijaz. And it's got to do with the fact that elephants don't have any sweat glands. So number one there, the elephants have a network of cracks and crevices on the skin, which allows a small amount of water to easily spread and cover a large area of skin. Number two, water spreads through the cracks, covering 10 times more area than a flat surface. Elephants have no sweat glands, so having as much of their large body covered in water as possible allows them to cool down via evaporation. Number four, water also acts as an adhesive for mud and allows the animals to cover themselves in layers of mud. This helps prevent parasites biting them and also cools them down. Obviously, pretty impossible to create mud in the Hijaz where there's no water. And without water, the elephants can't cool down. Elephants would likely die in a few hours out in the sun. So the story doesn't add up. Now, there's also another problem. The mythological utility of Mahmed being born in the year of the elephant. By pure coincidence, the Buddha was also born in the year of the elephant. It appears influenced by the story of the Buddha's mother Maya, who had a dream of an elephant when the Buddha was conceived. She was also known as Mahamaya, Great Maya, which sounds very like Muhammad. Both Muhammad's and Buddha's mothers also supposedly died soon after their births. And lastly, the year of the elephant also has a more mundane meaning. The Seleucid era, or Anno Graecorum, AG, literally of the Greeks, or Greek year, was the system of numbering years in use by the Seleucid Empire and continued to be used as late as the 6th century AD, as evidenced by inscriptions and writings from that time. The era dates from Seleucus I Nicator's reconquest of Babylon in 312-311 BC, which was considered to mark the founding of the Seleucid Empire. So in 305 BC, Seleucus conceded the eastern territories to Chandragupta in a peace deal for which he received 500 elephants, and from then onwards, elephants were featured on their coins. Became a prominent theme. So the elephants were associated with the Seleucid era. So we could easily see the phrase year of the elephant as being a more colloquial way of referring to the Seleucid era. So instead of saying the year of the Greeks, the year of the elephant would fit with that. So when it is asserted that Muhammad was born in the year of the elephant, well, every year could be called the year of the elephant if we follow the Seleucid calendar. So that's it from this very short series. I hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you all very soon. Bye bye.